A listener note, this story contains adult content and language. If you're listening to this podcast, you might want to go back and start at episode 1. This is a story being told in chronological order. Therefore, if you come in at episode 2, you might miss some details or context that are pretty important to the story. From Exclave Media, this is The Sicario Effect.
Se busca a Pablo Escobar. Recompensa 2,700.
Con John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez. ¿Usted por qué se entrega de nuevo a la justicia?
Porque no le debo nada a la...
A Colombian hired killer known as Popeye has been released from prison.
Hola guerreras y guerreros, yo soy su amigo John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez, conocido como Popeye.
Alias Popeye, mi señora.
Yo soy John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez Popeye, la hermana.
Episode 16, The Home Office. Back in December, when the story broke about Popeye attending Juan Carlos Mesa's birthday party filled with numerous members of La Oficina de Envigado, I had this deep feeling that Popeye was most certainly headed back to jail. Yet, after March, I began to understand a little more about Colombia. And one thing has become very apparent. When it comes to predicting outcomes in Colombia, don't count on your feelings. I think this is a Colombian thing. With the passing of each day and month, I just get more confused. As I follow this story, I look at the two possible outcomes. The first is if he goes back to jail. Now, regardless of why, that would almost be like a referendum on his crimes and past deeds. If he doesn't return to prison, then at a minimum, the government has an agenda that's very murky and likely corrupt. And if the latter is true, then one thing is for certain. It's pretty disheartening for the victims and their families who are still left with a deep sense of injustice. Yet, Popeye's back to normal, tweeting, posting videos, etc. His tweets of recent are quite political. He likes to weigh in on the various candidates for president. Business as usual. The discussion about him going back to jail seems to have all but died down completely. I kept thinking about my conversation with Esteban back in January. I feel weird saying this, but I am actually beginning to think he's right. For whatever reasons, this isn't going to happen. I'm actually doubting the reasons for why I decided to follow this. The event in December, it was like a blip. Yeah, I thought there was going to be something, but it seems that there isn't much more to this anymore. Despite my doubts and change in outlook, last week on April 8th, the newspaper El Tiempo reported that there were 3 different lines of investigations being carried out by the Office of the Prosecutor. One of those was what links Popeye had with the alleged head of La Oficina and narco-trafficker Juan Carlos Mesa, alias Tom. Since his capture in December, there was an alarming rise in the homicide rate in Medellin. The second line of investigation into Popeye involved an alleged debt collection service he was offering to various criminal networks in Antioquia. According to El Tiempo, there were witnesses claiming Popeye allegedly established a network that locates criminal organizations and provides them hired assassins and collectors to settle their illegal business debts. This one seemed quite surprising, because if it's true, well then it contradicts Popeye's claim of being out of the criminal life. I tried reaching out to El Tiempo to get more information, but they didn't respond to my request. One thing worth noting, when the newspaper writes about organized crime, they don't give out or print the reporters' names, thus making it hard to get any further details. The third, which I briefly mentioned in the previous episode, was the repossession of personal assets belonging to Popeye's mother, Aura Ofelia Vasquez. Authorities sought to find out why a woman who earned a modest income as a dressmaker and part owner of a confectionery company was the registered owner of 7 properties in Medellin, including a mega warehouse that she leased to Victoria Henao, the widow of Pablo Escobar. Mrs. Vasquez responded to the authorities' inquiry, claiming she had purchased these properties with money she had won in the Colombian lottery Megapuestas. Unfortunately for Mrs. Vasquez, court officials pointed out that her properties in question were all purchased in 1988, and the lottery Megapuestas wasn't in existence until 1990. The court concluded that these assets were acquired with money from drug trafficking, including the payments that Escobar made to Popeye for murdering judges, journalists, police, and civilians. Now, while these are all serious allegations, as someone who's been paying extremely close attention to this story, it feels like the initiative has been gutted, and the government is just spinning their wheels. I realize that what I just told you sounds serious, but I'm getting this impression it's not that big of a deal. Maybe I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. In part, I've been influenced by my Colombian friends who all are pretty negative that nothing's going to happen with this. Perhaps these investigations are just that. Investigations to look accountable. One thing was clear. Emerging from all these stories was a picture of Medellin's complex criminal infrastructure and its reach today. While not entirely shocking, Popeye's alleged links to this world exposed something very different than when he described the Medellin cartel hierarchy. It's a lot more intricate and advanced than the days of Pablo Escobar. In order to gain an understanding of the criminal landscape in Medellin and Colombia, I needed a guide of sorts, someone to help provide insight into these criminal organizations and the narco economy that flourishes in Colombia, the engine of all of this. Through this show, I've been fortunate to meet some really interesting people. Daniel Mauricio Rico is one of them, an economist from the National University of Colombia and a political scientist from Los Andes University. Daniel has worked as a policy advisor for drug policy, anti-money laundering, and against organized crime for the Financial Intelligence Unit of Colombia, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Justice, and the Colombian National Security Council. As a consultant on money laundering and criminal economies analysis, his experience includes working with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the United Nations Development Program, and the U.S. Department of State, and multiple national and international banks. As I like to say, he's the real deal when it comes to understanding the global narco trade and money laundering systems. In Colombia, one of the things since I've started this podcast is the issue with narco culture in general. By that I mean there is a very strong narrative, not just in Colombia, but around the world, of the Medellin cartel as being this somehow legendary criminal enterprise. And its legacy is very interesting because in a lot of ways, these guys today are considered by a lot of people like rock stars.
Pablo Escobar, he's a remarkable character. He's just like a cartoon. I mean, he was at some point, he was really rich, and he was also really violent, and that's what attracts a lot of attention. But in terms of drug infrastructure, he was not a relevant player in the drug trafficking industry. I mean, he was only on the top of his career for a few years, and he was not as rich or as powerful as the Cali cartel. I mean, Cali cartel was much bigger, what makes relevant Pablo Escobar is he just became the public enemy, number one public enemy, and he attracts a lot of attention. Was really dumb. I mean, was really stupid because most of them finish in jail and in prison or die at a really young age. And it's really different from other cartels. I mean, if you compare with the Cali cartel, all of them are alive. Their kids are alive and they go to universities in the United States. They clean the money and they succeed. And so it's just like two different type of roles in the drug industry, in the cocaine industry. And Pablo Escobar just decided to play the role of the violent guy. What was quite unique, I mean, is just other criminal structures, or what we can see right now is that everyone is trying to attract as less attention as possible, to use violence as less as possible. But the lesson learned from the Medellin cartel is like, if you use violence is really expensive. If you want to keep an army, if you want to fight against another cartel or against the police, the army, that's going to cost you a lot of money. And sooner or later, you're going to lose. And they will catch you and they will kill you.
So after Pablo was dead, there was a power vacuum in Medellin, correct?
Well, more or less, but no, because, I mean, some of the big guys of the Medellin cartel, I mean, Pablo Escobar was not the richest guy in the Medellin cartel. There was other guys making more money than him when he was dead.
Who was the richest?
Carlos Castaño was much richer than him. I mean, he just find the right guys to work. And Pablo Escobar was not trust. I mean, nobody can trust making deals with Pablo Escobar in the last 2 or 3 years of his life.
Wait, go back for 1 second. Sorry. Why was Carlos Castaño richer?
Oh, because he was exporting his own cocaine from the Urabá region, and he was controlling a large part of the territory with the paramilitary. Now, Carlos Castaño and his family, Fidel Castaño, and they were the modern creators of the paramilitary groups in Colombia. I mean, they start as bodyguards and working for narcos, and also to protecting landlords in the Cordoba region. But they just really rapidly they move into the cocaine industry in the larger scale, and they were able to have something that other groups didn't have. It was political ideology and affiliations and support from politicians, from
right wing.
They were getting the support of important entrepreneurs and companies. And actually, we will see both Colombian companies, foreign companies. I mean, Chiquita brand was involved in business with the paramilitaries and Carlos Castaños directly.
Yeah.
And they just became a security solution where everybody was happy. Narcos was making money, and also legal entrepreneurs were able to keep the guerrillas outside of their territory.
You said they were richer than Pablo Escobar.
Oh, yeah. And in the final years, I mean, Pablo Escobar, he was rich for a short period of time, but in the last 2 years, Pablo Escobar was not reliable in terms of drugs transaction, because he was not able to control his own organization. He had so many enemies. He has to hide. He cannot contact other narcos to make business. And at the end, actually, Pablo Escobar was doing kidnaps because it was an easy way to get money, because he was going bankruptcy. I mean, he was not able to support. I mean, he was having 6 wars at the same time. He was fighting against the Cali cartel. He was fighting against his own faction of the military, of the Medellin cartel that turns against him. He was fighting against the Colombian police. He was fighting against foreign governments at the U.S. and the DEA and the CIA. So he was having so many wars at the same time that he cannot manage. So other guys, I mean, the cocaine industry never stopped, and other guys just find the vacuum of leadership. So they start moving the cocaine that Pablo Escobar was not able to move.
Wow.
Actually, that was the reason that he kills the Galeanos, because he found that the Galeanos were moving cocaine without giving him his share. So rather than trying to make an agreement or something, they just kill him. He just killed him.
What were the years that were the most profitable or most productive years for Pablo?
1980s, the 80s. I mean,
Really?
the early 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, he became he started as an employee, and he started going up, and he was able to move more or less a couple hundred tons of cocaine per year. I mean, that's relevant. That's important. I mean, what's remarkable at that time is that those cartels, Medellin and Cali, were able to control from the production of the coca leaf to the distribution in the U.S. Now the structure of the business is completely different. I mean, no single cartel has an interest in such a long vertical integration. I mean, most of the cartels right now, they just are highly specialized in a specific stage of that.
Sure.
So if you compare, I mean, Colombia is producing probably 5 times more cocaine right now than it was producing during Escobar and the Cali cartel time. I mean, Colombia is producing more than 1,300 tons of cocaine, but there's not one single drug lord. It just is like a free market. Anybody can produce, anybody can smuggle in, anybody can distribute. And most of those smugglers are like under the radar of the authorities because they don't use violence.
Sure.
I mean, there are doctors, lawyers, I mean, guys with other profiles. So Pablo Escobar was unique in the use of violence, but he was not the most powerful person in terms of on the market of cocaine or the distribution. I mean, he was just one another player. He was making a lot of money because he was able to get nearly $20,000 per kilogram of cocaine in the smuggling. Now other guys are making around $7,000, $5,000 per kilogram, but they produce much more cocaine, and so they're getting richer than Escobar.
Let me ask you a question. In when I interviewed Popeye, he said something interesting. He said that the American dealer is the one that's really getting rich, which it didn't make sense to me because the price of cocaine to grow it and harvest it and then export it, they're selling it for a relative, and it's pure. The purity of it is quite high. and then they sell it. Then the American dealer takes shipment of it and then steps on it with, chemicals and everything to expand what was shipped to them and to, almost create 3 times the amount that they had been shipped. And then from that, they're making way more money. That makes sense, but it didn't make sense to me is that this money was not going to the Colombians, that it was somehow going to these American dealers that were making a ton.
Well, there's many. I mean, it's true. I mean, I think the argument is true. I mean, it's the most profitable component of the cocaine change is to the final distribution, the streets. I mean, there's a couple of middlemen. That's why Mexican cartels are richer than the Colombian cartels right now, or the Colombian criminal organizations. And the reason is they are closer to the consumer. So the final consumer, I mean, that's where the really money is there. And that's true in the U.S., but that's the reason also that some Colombian cartels or Colombian criminal organizations are moving to Europe, Asia, South America, especially a lot in Brazil and Argentina, because they're trying to get closer to the final client. And they're trying to open their new routes and to keep control of the cocaine as forward as possible. So they want to avoid a lot of middlemen in the process. And that's the reason Mexican cartels have succeeded a lot, because they are able to control the final distribution in the United States, something that the Colombian organization are not able to do anymore.
I thought that Popeye's assessment of it was accurate to a degree, but that somewhere along the way, along that chain that goes, that supply chain, it was essentially all controlled by guys that worked for Pablo Escobar, and thus would be, almost like middle managers, or, in a supply chain, that thus the profits would all be sent back up to the origin, pieces being chipped off along the way. But at the end of the day, the bulk of what was being sold was all going back up to the top.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, it's during the late 70s and early 80s, the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel were able to hire guys in Guatemala, Panama, Mexico, and the U.S. as their employees, and they controlled the entire market. But that changed. I mean, once the cartel was destroying Colombia, and there were multiple producers, because not a single cartel can control all the supply of cocaine, market conditions has changed, and everyone is just like, nobody works for anybody else. I mean, it's just buy and sell. And some organizations in Colombia are highly focused only on providing the drugs, the cocaine, until the coast. Somebody else pick it up and move into Panama. Somebody else buy it there and sell it in Costa Rica. And then just keep moving up and adding value and cost, and also cut substance that they use to reduce purity and increase profit.
Interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah. One thing that I am curious about was in one of the episodes, in one of the previous episodes, Popeye mentioned that there was a guy called Amador Carrillo Fuentes, El Señor de los Cielos, and he worked for both Pablo Escobar as well as the Cali cartel. He was their big outsource of their shipping operation. And it's my understanding, and this is what you might be able to shed some light on this, he was very responsible for changing the game as far as the strength of the cartel. Originally, he was hired as a guy to do a job, and there was a set price. No matter how much he moved, it was just he was getting a fee, and that was it. And my understanding was he changed it to where instead of getting a set fee, he wanted a piece of everything, a cut, a percentage. And by giving the percentage to Amador Carrillo Fuentes, to his organization, that it basically somehow or another weakened the Colombian cartels. In a lot of ways, I've heard it said it was the end of the cartels and their control over the cocaine business in global narco trafficking.
Yeah, that's true. I think it was a multicultural issue, and there was many facts going on. One is that, I mean, organizations like the Señor de los Cielos organization became more strong, and they just were able to establish like a monopoly in the smuggling in the border between Mexico and the U.S. That was one thing. But there was other things going on over here. I mean, Pablo Escobar was public enemy number one. There was a lot of pressure against him. And when he was finally killed, I mean, then his organization divided like in 12 guys, and each of them was just moving in their own routes. So now this guy, Amador, has 12 guys trying to sell in drugs to him. So he can just ask for a discount because there was no more longer a monopoly. Right. I mean, there was competition between them, so he established the conditions. And for the following 15 years, 20 years, Mexicans established the conditions with the Colombian drug dealers, and they said this is the price. This is until 2012 or 2000 between 2008 2010, when it was such a shortcut in the supply, and then the Colombians start having again market power and increased prices and fixed conditions. And I mean those type of agreements between them there has been a lot of changes. For example, for a long time, the Colombian drug dealers pay their traffickers with marijuana in Central America. So that was the reason when we did the interdiction of fast boats going to Central America, we always found cocaine and marijuana. And marijuana was not for sale for the cartel; it was just the payment so they can use the route to smuggling cocaine. And I mean, you can imagine all type of business and different type of agreements they made for many, many years. Exchange for guns, and then comes the money laundering thing. And so has multiple arrangement until the market becomes more democratic and there was more suppliers and more buyers.
Wow.
And the market expanded.
Do you know what the price of a kilo of cocaine is in Colombia right now?
Oh yeah, it depends. I mean, if you go to what we call a kitchen, when they produce that in the middle of the jungle, it's around $2,000 more or less per kilogram. But the same kilogram, it's 120,000 in St. Petersburg in Russia.
Right. Wow.
So it's a lot of incentives in the process of smuggling.
That's a big markup.
It will be around 20,000 in the U.S.
20,000. Okay. When I sat with Popeye, he said the number I think had was 30,000.
Well, 30,000 could be probably the market when you sell it as a retail. But when they bag and purchase a couple of tons of cocaine, 20,000 is a more realistic number.
What's the simple answer for how money laundering works? Because, two questions. One is, how does it work? And also, my understanding was that, and maybe it's still the same, when a Colombian drug dealer, sells his product, and then the profits are usually made in dollars, but it has to then be converted into pesos. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, it's in the old-fashioned system of Pablo Escobar, they were just putting the money in luggage and shipping the money in dollars in a suitcase to Medellin and then transferred to pesos, something that was really easy at that moment. But now things are much more sophisticated, and much of the drug dealers, they get the money in Mexico or in the United States. So they just create companies. And the United States is a very important hotspot for money laundering. I mean, it's really easy to move money in the United States because it's a huge economy. So, I mean, creating a company in Delaware is really easy, and just to make fake transactions from Delaware.
Well, also, just to interrupt, one thing to point out, in Delaware, you don't have to name the principals. You don't have to reveal the principals of a corporation, I believe.
Exactly. Much of the Colombian drug dealers will use the United States system because it's so easy and to hide. And they just send they have the cash there. I mean, I can tell you from an analysis we made about the links between contraband of cigarettes and money laundering of narcotics. So what we observe is, based on some cases that the police and the national attorney developed a couple months ago, is that the cocaine is paid in the U.S. and Mexico. The money of the cash from that, I mean, they create a company and they make a fake loan with the U.S. banks, and they send that money, the dollars, to Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, they bought and purchased cigarettes in China from companies that are not recognized companies. It's just from low-cost cigarettes, and those cigarettes they send it to Panama and Colombia. Once the cigarettes are here, I mean, the cigarettes are much more cheaper than real companies that pay taxes like Philip Morris or BAT or Camel or any other company, and they just expand the distribution of contraband cigarettes, and they get the money back because they sell the cigarettes and they get pesos, and also they maximize. I mean, they double the investment that they made in dollars when they sell it in pesos, because I mean, cigarettes are so cheap in China, and they can sell it here in a higher price and make money. So that's it. It's very simple. It's not very complex.
The one thing I wanted to just understand correctly, they set up a corporation in Delaware. Then they take a loan from who? Sorry, I think I missed.
From a bank in the U.S. I mean, they just create, for example, a fake textile company that's located in Florida, and they create a company in Delaware, and they get a loan from the bank, and then they pay the bank in cash with the money of the drugs they sell in the U.S. So for the bank, he just make a loan, and then he get paid. Back.
The bank will just allow them to. I mean, I would think that it's harder. You can't just walk into a bank.
No, it's really. I mean, just read what's going on with HSBC.
Well, yeah. I was thinking about.
I mean,
them.
if you have I mean, what I learned, and if you want to do money laundering for $1,000, that's going to be really, really hard. But if you want to do money laundering for $100 million, that's really easy. Nobody make questions. So it's just about the scale. I mean, there's as much money you have to invest and to build a company and everything. Really simple. It's really easy.
Wow. That's what you just said makes a lot of sense. It's a lot harder to do it for $1,000, but for $1 million or $100 million, it's quite simple. That makes sense. And but yeah, I mean, the part that's going off in my head is thinking, still in the bank, they're going to go, we want to see. I mean, they don't ask for much, I guess, in terms of looking at if they're going to loan someone $100 million, they're looking at it and going, I mean, I guess the banks know what they're doing. That's what it is. They're complicit in this too.
Yes, I mean, there are different levels of
complicity.
Yeah, and how they manage those things. Yeah, I think some banks has a really high skills and really high commitment about money laundering and that stuff, but some others are just created for that. I mean, we have in the past, the Cali cartel owns a bank. I mean, they didn't use a bank, they bought it. And criminal organizations can do that. I mean, we see it like really often. So, I mean, those are criminal organizations with a large scale operation. I mean, I tell you this, in the 1980s, when there was no internet and there was no, real-time operations, the Cali cartel was using operations through the Man Island near England and Iran, that was during the embargo, and sending the money to Colombia through petroleum operations. I mean, that was a huge operation. Huge investment, and they was doing that in the 1980s. So now you can imagine what they're doing right now.
Wow. So if I understand correctly, they would take. I'm just thinking I understand this correctly. They would take a loan from a bank and then use it to buy petroleum and things like that, and then sell that, and the profits from that.
You just create a company that produces nothing or produce a little bit, and you just say, well, I'm just make a sale of this and that. And it was really, the Cali cartel, when they was finally captured and they just make a judicial agreement with the U.S., they give back 2,000 companies. I mean, they have a portfolio of 2,000 companies, and you can name it. I mean, they have everything. They have airplanes, they have boats, companies, they have shrimp companies, they have drugstores companies, they have everything, and they use them when they need it. They produce wine, they produce you name it. I mean, they have a huge portfolio of companies that they use it for money laundering.
The two brothers, Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, those two guys are in jail in the United States, and they're going to be here for, well, as far as I'm aware, a long, long time, and they'll probably die here.
I'm not sure about it.
Really?
We'll see. They have provided a lot of information and they have a lot of context, but I'm telling you, they are well treated. I mean, some other guys are having a hard time, but I mean, what's happening from extradition is like Colombian drug dealers are paying like really low sentences in the U.S. Time in prison in the U.S. is really low for drug criminals. I mean, they only go there for a couple of years. They pay a fee to the treasury and they get back to Colombia. So it's not something I'm saying. It's the vice president of Colombia, the former vice president of Colombia was saying that. And we observe a lot of violence in some cities. And when we start looking, what's the reason for that? It's just a narco that just get back from the U.S. And he spent there 3 or 4 years. And now he's trying to get his roots, his contacts, his money back. So they get in a main confrontation with other criminal rings. And there's a lot of violence. And you can see it in the news. It's all the time. So extradition that was looked as a final solution 20 or 30 years ago, it's not a final solution anymore. It's just like we send them, they pay there, and they come back and keep the violence.
So, it's okay. Popeye, who on December 11th, 2017, goes to a party in a place called El Peñol, which is outside of Medellin, and the party gets raided by the Colombian police, and their main target is Juan Carlos Mesa, alias Tom, who at the time was the head of La Oficina de Envigado, which is is it a cartel? Can you call it a cartel?
It was a criminal ring, but they have more investments and they have more interest than only drugs. I mean, they are involved with many other criminal activities.
How significant is the office in Colombia at the moment?
Well, it's really important. I mean, it's a big players. I mean, it's a big players in the aspect of the industry that provides more profits. The really money is made. It's just the trafficking of large amounts of cocaine, but also the money laundering that is involved on it. So they don't really care much about producing the cocaine, or they don't care about the coca crops, or they don't care about the rural conditions of the cocaine industry. What they just focus is in just providing the money to buy large scale of tons of cocaine and use their allies to put the cocaine in Central America and Europe especially, and also to bring the money back. So there's two things that are important in the Oficina that I think are remarkable and different from other organizations. Number one is that they have succeeded, that they have been there in the business for more than 30 years, and they haven't been destroyed. And the reason is that they never have just one single head. It just has been like a formal company. I mean, they have a junta directiva, and they have some important leaders. But I mean, it's a modern system of administration of a criminal organization. The second thing is that they start to be a really violent organization. I mean, they were the sicarios, they were the hitmen of Pablo Escobar, and they just realized that the money is in other stages, so they just moved to that. And working on that, they have created important connections and in other countries and other business. I mean, for example, the Oficina Envigado play a main role, or a really, really big role, in the expansion of narco activities of the Colombian-made drug dealers in Argentina, Brazil, and Spain. So they feel as comfortable managing the business from Medellin as they do managing from Buenos Aires or from Madrid. I mean, they expand their territory based on alliance rather than using violence. So this criminal diaspora, they and other organizations use that tactics that is really different from the rationale of Pablo Escobar. He was trying to, rather than make allies, he was trying to get employees and to control other organizations through violence. They just want to share, I mean, the Oficina, they want to share profits, they control that. And a third aspect is that the Oficina has a legacy of intense confrontation between them. I mean, we have many times that factions, the Oficina has been divided into factions really often. So they start fighting each other, and there's just one section and expand. I mean, it's just like I would say, like an organization is expands and contracts constantly based on the leaders and the confrontations between them. So you can see the confrontations between Diego and against Douglas, and I mean, there's a long story about all this confrontation, and they are quite responsible of violence that occurred in Medellin 10 years ago.
Wasn't Don Berna, though, the head of it?
Yeah, he was the head, and to be the head, he has to destroy the other paramilitary groups. I mean, he was a paramilitary, I mean, and he just took control of the Oficina, he started paying them, and they put the Oficina under his control. He expanded as a paramilitary with more rural control, and after that he took the urban control of the Oficina. he had full control of the city.
Right. Now,
did I tell you the story of this guy that has the record of the best police in Medellin, of the country in Medellin? Did I tell you that story?
No.
This is a true story. It's a wonderful story to explain how the Pax Mafiosa working on Medellin after that. I mean, I met one guy. He's a police officer. He was really young, probably 24, 25 years old, and he was a pilot of the police. That's something that only like really, really good officers and has access to become a pilot. And it's mostly because they are well connected. So I asked him, he was my pilot when I was doing some work for the government. And so we travel together a lot. And once after our work, we just go and have dinner. And I asked him, why you are a pilot? I mean, who is your connection? I mean, who is your godfather? Who is protecting you? Who helps you there? I mean, are you the son or the great son of a former general of the police? And he told me, no. What happened is that I became 4 years ago or 3 years ago the best police officer of Colombia. And I say, how come? How you did that? And I said, well, I was the commander in one area of Medellin that has the highest rate of car stolen in the country. And after 2 years, I reduced that to zero. I mean, the area, the rate of cars stolen was reduced to zero. And I say, wow, you're very smart. You're very clever. What did you do to achieve that? And I said, I didn't do nothing. I said, how come? No, it was Don Berna order. He just gave the order to all the combos that nobody can steal more cars in Medellin. And if they store cars, they get killed. And I was there and I just I didn't do nothing. I mean, I print some flyers and some papers and I did some campaigns, but actually who solved the problem was Don Berna. He just gave the order and that's it. So it was part of the Pax Mafiosa. It was part Don Berna making agreements with the army. So the army and the police say, okay, you can manage the city, but you need to help us solve some problems. I mean, so urban security, cars stolen, homicides in parks and things like that. We don't like that. I mean, you can control if you can control your combos and make money on narcotics without increasing the violence, we're fine with that. So it was some kind of agreement under the table, and that was part of the success of Don Berna. What Don Berna was able to do, it was he was able to have rural and urban control, something that the Oficina didn't have before. I mean, the Oficina was focused on Medellin, and they do the business inside Medellin. But Don Berna was able to export cocaine and to have a large part of control in the areas of the paramilitary expansion in the north of Colombia. And he was also able to have urban control inside Medellin. So that was his crucial aspect. I mean, he was part of the two industries.
Someone told me he was like the attorney general of crime.
Yeah, kind of.
And that he was able to also stabilize, warring factions within the city, as well as...
He didn't make the mistake of Pablo Escobar. He just followed more the path of the Cali cartel. Said, it's better to have the army and the police in your side. And how you can make it in your side is not only to give them money, it's also to make the city more secure. That they have, their life is easier for all of us, and that's what they did. And so he was doing the cleaning of the what they call the combos, the gangs that didn't follow the rules. I mean, that they were ruining the city or when doing like really stupid things and very violent. He just took control of them and he kills a lot of them.
Okay.
I mean, I remember once a story once is that he banned the sales of some specific drugs in some specific days.
Really?
And he sold some of his criminals to the streets, and he gave the order to all the guys who sell drugs that you cannot sell these drugs during those days. And he sold some guys to the drug dealers, said I want to buy drugs. And I said, no, you can. And when they finally found somebody who sell the drugs, they just take out the gun and kill them and say, you have to follow the rules.
Wow.
So they sent like ghost buyers, or I don't know how to call it.
Guys that were posing as buyers.
Exactly. And that's the way he keeps control.
He established a structure, it sounds like, much more of a structure with there was quotas, there was taxes. The city, from my understanding, also became a lot safer.
Yeah, you see the numbers is really clear in homicides in every sense. Medellin, of course, there's a really beautiful story among that. I mean, if you ask some local politicians, they will tell you is because they were investing more money in education and culture.
Mm-hmm.
What is really kind, it's really important for a government, but it's not the real picture of what's going on. It was just a pax mafiosa. Criminals just decide just to become less violent, more smart, and put in their pocket police and the army and just make a safe, more easygoing way to do business. Medellin is the financial center of narco activity since then, and they need to keep in control of any action against them. I mean, they need to control the police, the Fiscalía, and to keep the area secure for them. So the Oficina Envigado was more in a different business. I mean, they were providing services for multiple narcos. It doesn't matter, Colombians or whatever. They were just more focused on the transaction. I would say that the Oficina has more clients, some of them very small, and that has no interest in the rural areas. So narcos has... And when the paramilitaries start having a conversation with the government for a peace process, most of those guys of the Oficina Envigado just change the hat, and they just show up as poor as paramilitaries. So, I mean, for example, one of the business that Don Berna and other guys made is that they just built armies. They just put people together, guys together, put a uniform and guns, and they sold those pelotons or small criminal groups, and they sold those groups to narcos so they can just go and show up as paramilitary commanders, so they can get released and have a benefits and go to a short period of times in prison and be part of the peace process. So it was that happened in 2003. So it's not very easy to put a line to make the difference between, okay, when there's paramilitaries and when there are narcos or criminals of the Oficina, because they have interest to be in both sides of them. And I will say Don Berna was the head that was like the in Spanish is called bisagra, what opens and closes the door for both of those words, the rural and the urban. Now, I would say if we take a picture right now, I mean, the Oficina and the Terraza and all of them has a very important participation on the business in the rural areas. I mean, I've been in some towns outside Medellin and in the mountains of Antioquia, and where there's illegal gold mining and things like that, you will see them with a big presence in those areas. I mean, they are behaving also as paramilitaries right now. I know it's confusing, but
yeah,
I'm trying to make it as clear as possible.
Now, just to jump ahead, from Don Berna, he went to jail, and then he got extradited to the United States. He's where he is right now. So who takes over after him?
I think it was Douglas. I mean, there's multiple. Yeah, that's some. I don't.
A guy called Alias Douglas.
Yeah, in the Oficina, but I'm not sure. It was too long ago. It was a division. I mean, I remember when he was sent to the U.S. I mean, it happens to him and Salvatore Mancuso. I mean, the organization gets divided in two: those that were loyal to Don Berna, and those that wants to take control of Don Berna's actions. So it was a confrontation between the two sides of I think the confrontation was between Sebastian and Douglas. So finally Douglas win, and then Douglas was captured, and there was a secondary division between other two factions until one take control of the other one. And it has split like 3 or 4 times since Don Berna get extradited.
So you have Don Berna. Then there's Leonardo Munoz, alias Douglas. And then after Leonardo Munoz, alias Douglas, then you had, then there was Erickson Cardona Vargas, I think was his name. Sebastian, yeah, exactly. My understanding was Sebastian get sent to jail. Coincidentally, the same
weekend as Douglas.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, I think they capture. I mean, I have to refresh my memory, but I think that Douglas was captured when he was, Douglas provided the intel, the information to capture Sebastian. And during the weekend that he was celebrating that Sebastian was captured, he was captured.
So they captured both of those guys at the same time. Wow.
Yeah, it was the same story, but and what is happening is that now criminal careers are shorter. I mean, those guys stay in the position of leader only for a couple years, a couple months, or a short period of time, because once they get identified and became public enemy number one, the police, the DEA, the army, they just go against them and they catch them, they found them. So some of them decide to go outside Colombia to avoid authorities, and some of them just get captured because it's really, really, really difficult to hide in Colombia, in Medellin, if you are a main criminal right now. I mean, if you are against the police, and they will capture sooner or later. The people in the organization have so much incentives to betray their leaders.
I have a question. So I look at guys like Sebastian, and I'm just going to be honest in this. I don't know enough. He doesn't appear to be this mastermind criminal, because again, if you look what he got in trouble for, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison in the United States for narco trafficking. But in Colombia, he was arrested. What he was arrested for in Colombia was murder, I believe. In Colombia, he was also wanted for, I thought it was for murder in Colombia.
Oh yeah, I mean, in Colombia they have long sentences for homicides, for you name it, massacres. I mean, they have been responsible for hundreds of murders. I mean, you don't get the boss being a nice guy. I mean, criminology provides a lot of explanation of what you just found, and I agree. It's that criminal careers are getting shorter, and something that happens is that criminals, they're younger. I mean, so they achieve power when they are like mid-30s or sometimes late 20s. And so that's why they don't survive too much, because they are less capable, less experienced, and that's one reason. And the second thing is that that is also happening is that those guys they don't want to die. They want to survive, and they want to go to. They don't fight until they are dead. Most of them doesn't get killed. They just know that. I mean, the main thing is that at some point they have to challenge, deal with the court and a judge, and so they prepare for a long time to have a good negotiation with the U.S. Justice system and the Colombian justice system, and it's unique cases when they get more than 20 years in prison, but most of them just get 5 to between 3 and 8 years. I will guess is the most.
But like if you look, Don Berna didn't. And neither did
no, but because Don Berna was a big fish,
right,
big fish. But we extradite around a couple hundreds drug dealers every year. I think it's like 120 every year. I mean, that number is easy to find. So of course, I mean, Don Berna and those big guys, they will get a hard sentence, but mid-level guys that this third generation of the Oficina Envigado, the guys from the Norte del Valle, they just get a very short period of short terms of in prison.
Now, so couple things. One, Erickson Vargas Cardona, that was alias Sebastian. So he goes to jail at the same time alias Douglas does, and then there's like, from my understanding, and I just want to make sure I'm correct, the office kind of splits up, if you will, and where there's different factions. Do you know by any chance when alias Tom, Juan Carlos Mesa, my understanding was after alias Sebastian was captured, that alias Tom was the one who stepped up and assumed control, at least, of the office.
I don't. I have to follow that. Yeah, I mean, Tom became a main figure. I mean, my perception was Tom was in the business for a long time, and he was like an associated, but he was not taking control of a big portion of the oficina. He just ran his business, and when this became a vacuum of power that all of the other guys were captured. He just became the visible part of the organization. But he was there in the organization for a long time, but he was not leading the organization for the entire time. I mean, there are some reports and news of the police when he was captured, but I will say, like, for 99% of the population in Medellin, Pom was an unknown person. I mean, he can go to a restaurant or any place and nobody will see his face or recognize him.
Thus, when he was captured on December 9th in El Peñol, it was a big surprise for people, and at the same time for Popeye being there. Juan Carlos Mesa, alias Tom, is on the list to be what they called the Clinton list, which I'm sure you're familiar with. He's on the Clinton list, which, creates a greater probability that he'll be extradited to the U.S. If he gets extradited to the U.S., my thought was, I'm thinking of extradition as something that's really bad. I'm thinking of it as like, oh man, forget it, they're screwed. But that's, I guess, an old way of looking at it from what you're saying, which is they can come here, they can do a few years, they can make a deal to provide information, and then they can come back
and money, and a lot of money.
You mean they pay?
They pay they pay a fee to the federal system. They pay some millions of dollars that goes to the Justice Department.
The U.S. federal system or the Colombian federal system?
The U.S., we don't get a money. We don't get a penny from that. They pay them. And I do interviews with narcos all the time, and that's one of the reasons they're trying to hide their money outside Colombia, because the money that they have outside Colombia, in Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico, Argentina, is money they can use to pay the federal system in the U.S. and get released earlier. If they have that money inside Colombia, they cannot negotiate with the U.S. They have to negotiate with the Colombian government. And that's one of the reasons narcos don't want to bring us all their money to Colombia. They want to keep a safe deposit outside Colombia that they can use it in case they go to prison in the U.S.
So in a previous episode where only in relation to Popeye and how when Popeye was discovered at the party with alias Tom, aside from all the questions that raised, one of the things that I noticed was, as we did research, was, while Popeye was, he for that period of a few weeks right after that happened, he was on Twitter a lot. He was, ranting about stuff. But there was another news story, this was about a little more than a month after he was, the birthday party for alias Tom that was raided. This guy, Luis Fernando Castaño Azate, alias Botija, was shot down in Medellin. He was killed. And when I did some research, what I found was the guy had been captured. This is back in, 2009. He, on smuggling charges, he was extradited to the U.S. the following year. And then once he was in Florida, he was convicted. He was sentenced to 10 years. But in jail, somewhere along the way, he made a deal. He became a witness for the Justice Department. And then his testimony was used in the prosecution of a bunch of...
Yeah, that's really common and creates a lot of violence. Creates a lot of violence between them because, it's just a way to get out. It's just like you give some of your colleagues names and contacts so the DEA and the Colombian police can go against them. But it's really transnational. So the Colombian drug dealers that were in prison, they provide a lot of information about El Chapo, routes, contacts, and all they have, and they get the benefit of going early home as a compensation of the corporation. So it's about the Colombians, but it's transnational. If you're a drug dealer and if you have information about other narcos, you have millions of dollars that you can use as a negotiation. You get released early. The big problem is when you are a narco and you don't have anything, or if you are in a more complex federal crime. For example, killing a member of the DEA or something like that, that's when it gets complicated and they get long sentences. But for most of them, they just go and spend between 3 and 6 years, and that's it. They're gone. Some of them being released and are coming back to Colombia are some guys that have, as Popeye, more than 200 murders. They're responsible for more than 200 killings. And it's just like it's not in the interest of the federal system to keep them in prison. It's just like we get the information, we get the money, and they send it back to Colombia. So it's like a recycle of the criminal activity. They come here, they get back, they start again, and this is the cycle of violence that we are seeing right now. We are seeing a lot of an expansion of cocaine production and an expansion of criminal activity, because extradition is not a final process. I mean, they go to prison and they get out. None of them spend a long time in prison. They just pay for it, and I keep myself. And I get the bullets. They get visas, and I get the bullets.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Seriously, it helps. I hate bothering everybody for this, but I gotta do it. Please visit our website for a full list of credits and some cool bonus materials, like photos, videos, and declassified documents at thesicarioeffect.com. If you're not sure how to spell it, it's the name of the podcast. Or you can follow us on Instagram at The Sicario Effect, or on Twitter at Sicario Effect. There is no the in the handle. And on Facebook at Exclave Media. I'm Jonathan Branstein, your host and writer. The show is produced by me, Caitlin Tyrrell, Ernie Hurtado, and Matt Olson. Our editor is William Broughton. Our engineer, sound design, and mix, Ernie Hurtado. Co-producer, Esteban Orozco. Music composed by Preston Nowakowski. Artwork, Juan Felipe Orozco. Additional music is composed by William Broughton. Interview translator, Alejandro Caseño. Additional translation, Juliet Restrepo, Cristina Madrid. Production support was provided by Daniel Urria. Special thanks to Laura Kate Jones, Mauricio Builes, Alejandro Brugas, Alejandro Doring, Alexandra Doring, Tim Fufus, Tom Freston, Ross Bernard, Kelvin Wells II, Saad Mohseni, Yoshi Obayashi, Jeff Frankel, Stephen Molina, and the fabulous Los Hermanos Orozco. Additional thanks to the Museo Casa de la Memoria in Medellin, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, Michael Pinckney, Mary Finch, Iafit Medellin, Luisa Garces. Also, please visit the Narco Tour project at narcotour.co. That's narcotour.co. This podcast is dedicated to the memory of Guillermo Cano, Anthony Bourdain, and Larry Bresner.